This conference will now be recorded.
What was that, Jill?
Judy said she joined us. There was a little message that popped up.
Okay. Judy, do you want to say where you're from?
Sure. Judy Sventek from the Metropolitan Council. Sorry,
Okay.
I was having difficulties earlier. Thank you.
Okay, so you and Dan can figure out who's gonna present.
Dan will be
Okay,
presenting, just to let you know. Thank you.
okay. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So move. Pat Reiner.
Okay,
second.
Pat moved, and who's second? Jill?
Second.
Arun Heshmati.
Okay, Pat and Jill. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Same sign. We have an agenda. I entertain a motion to approve the meeting summary of the January 19th meeting.
So moved. Arun Heshmati.
Arun moved, and who seconded?
Pat Reiner. Or either way.
Pat seconded. Okay, any discussion or corrections? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, they're passed.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, next I'd like to invite Mark. The topic is the Metro Watershed Base Implementation Funding Update, which has given all of us heartburn and continues to do so. And I'd like to have Mark and Emily give background and timeline and where we're at right now and what we're doing moving forward. So Mark, you want to take it away?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you can all see that.
There it is.
Got it? Okay. Great. So I'm going to have just a little background kind of process that's been going on for a few years, and that's kind of for the benefit for some of the folks that haven't been around as long, just to kind of get us all back up to speed and kind of land on our where the metro watershed districts are headed in terms of a recommendation for an approach, and then turn it over to Emily to kind of talk through some of the criteria and conditions for that kind of approach that we're recommending. So again, just for some historical context, there's been a local government water roundtable in 2011. There was some legislation that was introduced to allow this comprehensive local water management done on a watershed basis. In 2013, the roundtable recommended long-term predictable state funding for implementation of these actions that were in the watershed-based plans. And then in 2016, there was a funding work group policy paper, and I kind of extracted some of the pieces for the metro area because of the long-standing 1982 law for mandated watershed planning. Acknowledging that there had been mandatory planning since the 80s. The other recommendation is that these metro area groups have a block grant for implementation, and that these watershed management activities should be in a prioritized, targeted, measurable plan as part of the 103B process. So again, a little closer in the timeline, FY 18-19 was kind of the first pilot. In that pilot, there was an allocation on a county boundary, and the SWCDs within the counties were the kind of the lead to convene the groups. They had to make decisions about collaborative or competitive approach, and then how to ultimately distribute the funding. And most groups went on kind of a formula basis. The most recent 2021 pilot, the groups were reorganized on about 10 different watersheds in the metro area, like the West Mississippi, East Mississippi, North Minnesota, South Minnesota. Same decisions had to be made though about the approach, collaborative, competitive, or some criteria, ultimately getting to some distribution of the funding. One new element in this last biennium is the SWCD annual work plans being eligible as well. So a lot has happened when we turn the calendar to 2021. There was a plan for an early February meeting with Bowser and MAWD to talk about this watershed-based implementation for this next biennium. Prior to that, though, the Metro administrators met with Emily to talk about, rather than giving 25 different perspectives, maybe if we had a more common message, it would be more useful to Bowser. So we did that on the 28th, met with Bowser, kind of conveyed our preferred approach and recommendation. On March 11th, the Association of Administrators met, and part of that spring meeting, we had a breakout session for Region 3. And again, Region 3 is the metro area. And a big part of that was the watershed-based funding. So we kind of were able to kind of hone our message again on what the preferred alternative for this next biennium would be. We did have another meeting with staff and Bowser, kind of part 2. There were a number of alternatives that Bowser presented, and we asked that the kind of the MAWD or watershed recommendation be included, and Emily will talk about that. I think you may know there were a number of listening sessions. These were just general MAWD Bowser listening sessions. The Region 3 was on April 1st, and again, there are a number of topics that we talked to Bowser's staff and leadership about, but again, the watershed-based funding was a very a key topic. And then on April 12th, Bowser has launched a survey, and I believe the responses are due on the 23rd. So that's kind of where we've been. And I just want to, so I hand it off to Emily, highlight the kind of unified or recommended solution for Bowser that projects identified in state-approved, locally adopted, comprehensive multi-year 103B plans are eligible for the watershed-based funding. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emily. And Emily, when you want me to change, just say slide.
Okay, thank you, Mark. The one thing that when we came up with this solution, we just felt like it was the solution that meets all of the criteria that people are looking for or expecting with the with the watershed-based funding. And just a little bit of history on that. It's kind of started out, like Mark said, with the one watershed, one plan concept. And then when we moved into we had called it Fund the Plan for many years. When we moved into the Fund the Plan, there was an argument made that the Metro already had these comprehensive watershed plans. So let's not make the Metro do the one watershed, one plan, but they should be eligible for the Fund the Plan money. And so this concept of how to distribute the money and who's eligible, what kind of projects get implemented, it's an alignment with those principles. It's an alignment with the session law that outlined how the money could be spent. It is consistent with the guiding principles that Bowser approved for this funding. And it is just an efficient and effective way to manage the money and the resources. Slide. And you don't have to read all of these, and please don't. So that was the first meeting was more or less led by us, where we proposed our ideas to Bowser. And then the second meeting was Bowser then proposed ideas to us. They had also met independently with the SWCDs, and they had come up with 5 ways that they thought could move forward. And maybe the only thing that you need to look at on this slide is of those first 5, you'll see that 3 of them we do not believe are efficient ways to run this program. And that's one of the criteria that's expected out of the One Watershed, One Plan. And that was the process to get all of the entities in one room and decide how you're going to spend the money. there was so many meetings and so much time and energy. And then, entities would get, $90,000, but the hours and whatever, when they already had a plan, it just didn't seem like the best use of time. And a couple are the C, that option. That's kind of just to distribute money to all the entities. So the SWCDs, the WDs, the perhaps cities, perhaps counties, depending on how that works. But that doesn't really take into account all of the planning and prioritization that we do when we take 2 years to do our comp plans. And it's an incredible waste of the investment we've already made. And so we don't think that meets the criteria that would make this a really solid program. And then the option D, one of the other pieces was with the Fund the Plan, we were trying to eliminate a competitive nature to getting the clean water funds. If we've gone through 2 years of work to figure out where the best projects can go, why are we competing against one another? And so we either have inefficient ideas here, competitive, or and not lining up with solid watershed management principles. So we did ask that our suggestion was added to that. It was disappointing to us that we did not see the idea that we had presented weeks earlier on their list of ideas when they came back with proposals. Next slide. And just breaking down the solution that we came up with just a little bit further. So again, the projects that could get funded with this Fund the Plan money, they would be in a locally adopted plan. So think about all the stakeholder engagement we do to get our priorities and see where the projects, what people value to fix. It's state approved, meaning that the Bowser board approves them. In the last pilot, there was an addition that SWCD annual work plans would be approved by staff, and they would be on the same threshold of being eligible for the funds as our 2-year comprehensive 2-year planning plans. Of course, ours were comprehensive, a multi-year. That was language from the statute that said they must be multi-year plans. So we do think that that was not fully in line with the statute when Bowser approved annual plans to be eligible for that funding. And to break this down, we didn't come in with these next 2 points because we still had just a little bit of disagreement on if this was exactly the right way to do this, but we were like at 95%. Some people were just wanting to think about it a little bit more, but we're thinking that these grants should just go directly to the comprehensive watershed plans. There are areas in the metro that have the one watershed, one plan. Send it to that plan. There are the other entities, we have comp plans, and just send them to that plan and let that board decide where to spend the money on the best projects. And I think we have a great history of and demonstration of funding our SWCDs, and providing revenue to them to do good work. And I think there was some concern that perhaps nobody would give any money to anybody else. They would just keep it all for themselves. But I just don't think that's what happens in the metro here. So these are watershed, in the green there, these are watershed-based planning, and this is watershed-based funding, locally adopted, approved by the Bowser board. This is the most efficient use of time to spend that money. It is prioritized, targeted, and measurable, and it's not competitive. There was also a little bit of concern that perhaps our plans didn't account for all the work that other entities do that contribute to the goals being met. And so we did offer a solution to that. I actually offered this a couple of years ago, but we're offering it again, that there would be a very simple process where if an SWCD is, or a county or a city is doing good work that is not in our plan and contributes to our goals, we could do this through a simple amendment process where they would request that their work be accounted for in our comp plans. They send it to us, we look at it, figure out where it fits in, prioritize, see if we can measure it against the others, add it in, boom, done. You know, run it through the amendment process. And I did do some accounting on whether or not the plans are actually inclusive of the other entities. I didn't get through all 33, but I got through most of them, and they are in most cases. I actually didn't find one that didn't account for the work by other people. There were a couple of watersheds that are really small and not particularly active, but they were already in a one watershed, one plan. So I didn't have to worry about those because that we're saying that the money would go to that one watershed, one plan. And so those folks have already figured out how they're going to work together and how they're going to spend the money. Next slide. So next steps, after our last meeting with Bowser, and this would be the one that just specifically talked about this funding issue, we had suggested several approaches that Bowser could use to analyze the 6 different solutions. And what we wanted to have considered is what are the exact criteria we are building this program off of, and then take a look at each of the solution. And if there are conflicts between one or two, then take a look at those and make some decisions. And I don't know if we weren't communicating clearly, but we didn't feel that we necessarily ended up on the same page. So a couple of administrators are actually going to they're doing that analysis and going to send a letter to Bowser with trying to better explain why we think this is the best approach. And just to put it a little bit more in writing, it seems like before when we've had stakeholder sessions, we talk, but then when we hear back what the stakeholders that were listening, what they heard, it's not in alignment with what we thought we were saying. So we're going to try and, like in this case, we're going to send back in writing what we were trying to say there. And then MAWD will be writing a letter also. And what we're going to do is the MAWD board will review this at their next meeting on May 3rd, or I think it's 3rd, May 3rd, and then ask members in the Metro, so ask you guys if you would be willing to sign on to that letter also. This is an approach that often is used in the legislature. If there is one concept that a whole bunch of people agree on, they will write one letter and then put a long list of entities on the signature line saying, yes, we all back what's in this letter. So it's just another technique to say this is really important to us. It isn't just a couple of people who are whining or want it their way. And so we're going to try that approach. So we're going to the MAWD board will approve that. Well, if they do, I guess I should say that. Hopefully they approve that, and we will send that out May 3rd, May 4th. If you could put this on your agendas for May, discuss this, and if you agree with the contents of the letter, then let me know and we'll add that to you, and we will send that off in June. The last time in the second pilot of this funding, I believe the final decision on policy was made in September, and it ran through some committees. So I think our timeline is still going to be okay. And I will let folks know what is in that letter before we send it also, so that they can prepare if committees start to meet before that. So that is our timeline on that. Next slide. And I did have, I guess, just to be very honest, we have been frustrated with our ability to effectively communicate our concerns with Bowser. And someone was an administrator from the Metro here said, Emily, what's our plan? Like, do we have a strategy? Like, we've got to fix this. And I said, let me tell you all the things I've tried. I am out of ideas, but so I just want to run you through some of the things that we have done since hiring an executive director and having another body to advocate for you. Originally, when I first started, my number one goal on this trying to resolve this friction between us and them, I knew that there were definite misunderstandings that existed between Bowser and watersheds. There were certain things that I knew from my time representing SWCDs. I just knew there was false information that was leading to some extra friction. So I thought I've got to I can be a mediator here and or a communicator. So I tried that. And then if somebody had specific concerns, I always a liaison back and forth, represent MAWD members, of course, when we have meetings and stuff. And then this summer, I started meeting weekly with John Jaschke, because it just seemed like we had enough issues that we should just schedule a time every week and just sit down and say, okay, what's up right now? And so that's been really good. And those, actually, I was supposed to have one today, and I asked for it to be rescheduled because it was right when they were going to read the verdict. So, but we usually hit that every single week. The only time we maybe miss one is if one of us is on vacation. So those have been effective. I have tried to increase a communication with our Bowser representatives, so Jill and Joe, and to, if there's issues in the board packet, run them through that, answer any questions they have. So that's been another thing that we've added. Next slide. And then we did just this year, when we were talking about some of the things we did, we altered the process for getting stakeholder feedback, because we felt like we were in this repetition where, and I will give Bowser, they spend a lot of time and a lot of effort into trying to get feedback from us. They go through all the steps most of the time, but somehow we are not getting our messages across. And so we thought, well, if we continue to do the same thing, we're going to continue to get the same results. What can we change? And that's when we decided to all get together ahead of the listening session and try to have one voice. And I think that helped. Because those conversations sometimes, they're just so messy, and we just need to sit in a room and figure out, what are the problems? What do we think the solutions are? Eliminate ones that we don't think are that have good merit, and have those messy conversations behind closed doors. And then when Bowser did come to the meeting to present their ideas that they were going to work with, I did let the administrators know, asked a couple of them if it would be okay, and I made an announcement at the beginning of the meeting that we were going to wait to give feedback until after the meeting, because we were not provided any materials in advance of the meeting. So we didn't have anything to review or think about, even though we did ask for that. And that's happened too many times, and I know it's hard sometimes to get everything done in advance, but I just think if we want to provide quality feedback, we have to think about it ahead of time. And so that's why now we are writing that letter, and the administrators, that kind of more technical letter, and sending that back. Number 6, I did kind of broke the rules of, I don't know, hierarchy or a chain of command, and I just called everybody to a meeting and said, we've got some concerns. So I called the Bowser board president, the executive director, our president, me, our Bowser board reps, and the MAWD president, and said, let's have a meeting. And it just so happened that there was a canceled meeting, and so I thought everybody was going to be available, and they were. And so we had a discussion, just all of us saying we've got some things we need to work on. Next slide. And unfortunately, at the March Bowser board meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, they did cover the executive director's performance review. And when that was presented, it was presented kind of, it was a very positive, all things are going great, we do a great job. And that's not the sentiment that I hear from you and that I don't hear from members. And I'm on the agenda every month. And so I decided I was going to bring the issue up in front of the entire Bowser board. And I said, if we're gonna, since you were discussing performance, I have to say that I have members that disagree, and I think there's areas for improvement. I often hear that watersheds don't feel heard. I hear many times that they don't feel understood. And what that means is the Bowser staff that your employees are working with don't have a very good background in what a watershed district is, what they do, what statutes they have. And I did even have a regional manager tell me that, oh, I don't really understand watershed districts that much. If I have a problem, I call Kevin. And that when I heard that, I was just like, wow, that was for me the last thing that I could hear to not make this an issue. And so I did tell the board that, there's lots of solutions for that. We do our watershed management training. We can provide that training to Bowser staff. We are going to try and do smaller, shorter lunch and learns, especially when the MAWD handbook gets finished up. We'll maybe start some of those earlier too, but we can fix that problem. But it is a problem. And the last statement that I made was that MAWD members don't feel like a priority. There is a lot of resources that go to soil and water conservation districts. And I know that there's a lot of really good reasons why a lot of those resources go to the SWCDs. The biggest reason is that it's federal funding. When there's millions of dollars of federal funding, and they run that nationally to soil and water conservation districts across the whole state. But we're also seeing a trend that when Bowser can represent all types of local government, it's still pretty heavy on SWCDs. And in the example I gave was we had looked at the news stories that they had published in 2020, plus the first 3 months in 2021. There were 50 stories that covered local governments, and there were only 8 of those were stories about watershed districts. And I did find out that there was some extra money from the feds to tell stories about SWCDs, but I still think that is still too low, even if you account for that. And we need to, make sure we get our stories to their media people. And I asked the administrators, and some people have already been doing that and copying me. But these are serious. When these are how you guys and other members are feeling, we need to proactively figure out ways that we can fix these and get on a better ground. And when I was done talking, I was concerned that there would just be a really awkward silence, but there wasn't. There actually was a bit of discussion after I brought that up, and there was some concurrence, and saying that this is a problem with a lot of state agencies where they lose focus with the locals and things like that, but they acknowledged that they believed that these are real feelings, and was happy to hear that we were willing to, continue to work on finding some solutions for those. I got some email messages and some text messages also from folks just thanking me for just really having a tough conversation and being courageous to do that. So I was not expecting that, but it certainly was appreciated because I was darn nervous to do that at a public meeting. I did also, number 8, I did start attending some Bowser committee meetings as I was able. And then we also, MAWD decided to put together a state policy committee. And so they helped me review board packets, committee packets for any watershed water management policies. And if they see some concerns, they get it to me right away. And those board packets, they're large. Sometimes I can't get through all of them before every meeting. So that's really been helpful to get those extra eyes on those documents. Last page. And the last couple of items here, at the last meeting also, there was some policy changes that were specific to the One Watershed, One Plan program. There was one on tribes, that the tribes were, when you set up your policy committee, they would be automatically entitled to be on that policy committee as sovereign nations. And so there was that, and that is a state initiative to include tribes more. And the other change was that cities also had the same entitlement, and townships. And so the policy that, I think the word entitled was not a great match, but to allow every single city and every single township, and obviously they won't, not all of them will, they don't have the resources nor do they care that much to spend 30, 40 meetings talking about how we're going to manage our water. But that could, in some situations, could be problematic, especially in a watershed like Sauk, perhaps, Sauk River, where there's just a lot of friction between the cities and the watershed district. And then we're already feeling like on a lot of those policy committees, there's one watershed entity, there might be 6 SWCDs, 6 counties, and then all of a sudden you try to have a voice and you're one of 13. So now then it even gets smaller, and Margaret Johnson has this great phrase she says all the time, like the counties, they have the most to say with the least to gain. They are the least invested in watershed management, but because county commissioners just know how to, get their voices heard. They're always fighting for resources, and they're not afraid to offend anybody. So a lot of times in these meetings, we just get overpowered. And so we did ask that decision be tabled, and it was. That was the first time we were able to get something tabled. And that policy was not run by any local governments or any previous One Watershed, One Plan recipient or participants to see if there would be negative impacts on that. And so for both of those reasons, we asked that to be tabled. And then the last thing here is the letter that I mentioned that we would be writing and asking for your support. So we continue to work on these issues, and if you have more ideas or how we can just more effectively work with our state agencies and communicate, certainly let us know. I committed that we would be working to find solutions, and so we will continue to do that. Any questions?
Emily,
I have a question, and that is, you prepared a very comprehensive and extensive list of things that you're doing on behalf of MAWD. But I have to confess, this is the first that I've seen the majority of this, and I'm supposedly a manager of a watershed district. Are you sending out this information to the administrators, and we hope they're distributing it, or only to the MAWD board? And I just want to know where is the loop broken that I'm not getting any of this input before we sit down here today.
Right. Yeah, no, that is that is a good point. And it actually, until the administrator asked me, what's our plan? I didn't even realize what our plan of how much work we had actually done. And we definitely, I'm only, only one person, and the communication, of what we're doing seems to be the thing that gets dropped, the ball that gets dropped. But that it's a totally valid point. I personally get stuck on some of this stuff because how do I put this? I mean, now this list certainly could go in a newsletter, but do I put it in a newsletter? Hey guys, I'm meeting with the executive director every week now. Or hey guys, I'm starting to work with Jill and Joel more often, because it just was so incremental, but it's so many conversations and so we definitely, the MAWD board is actively discussing this. Like, how do we communicate everything that we're doing in a more effective manner so that people know that we're really advocating on their behalf? And so we are working on it. Thank you definitely for that feedback.
Well, I would suggest, for example, that this series of slides that you just showed, which delineate what you've been doing, and I don't disapprove of in any way, shape, or form what you've been doing. I would like to have known about it because there are situations or opportunities where I might have offered additional input, or I might have said, well, I happen to be having lunch with one of the Bowser board members, and I'd be glad to bring this topic up. I don't know that any of those are valid, but necessarily I would have appreciated being at least on a copy list of this set of transparencies, because there are a lot of stuff in there that I am very much in favor of and would like to help in one way or another. And maybe I am in an unusual position, having been on the MAWD board for 9 years and now sort of feeling like I'm left out in left field from time to time. But that's okay. I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate what Mary and the MAWD board are doing. I just like to get copies of this so at least I'm aware of it and can participate at the local watershed level in making these good things happen.
Craig, this was just put together to between yesterday and today, when Emily and Mark.
What took her so long to get it out here? No, I'm just kidding.
I know. My bad.
Craig, I'm an engineer. I solve problems. I don't communicate that. I don't communicate all the work I do. But I know that's
that I understand and that I accept.
What we could do though is post this deck out on the MAWD website, and then anybody can have it for their reference.
That would be good. That way you don't need to be circulating it, but it's available for those of us that are curious.
Right.
I think maybe instead of putting it on the website, I can send it out in the newsletters that we started sending out. We can have a story about that. And just since we're talking about that too, we are in a process right now of switching up our website and our social media so that we have a public facing a general public facing view that people can see us. So on our website, if you are not in MAWD as a member, you'll be able to see, what the watersheds are, what they do are, things like that the general public would be concerned about. And then some of our, like I'll say messy again, some of our messy stuff, we're gonna put in a more private part of the website where just you will be able to have access to those, and you can dig in there and find different things, maybe our newsletter content, because we do kind of have two audiences, and I've struggled with that over the years, and now it seems more and more clear now that we do need a general public face out, and we need a membership piece, and to try and figure out how both of those can work all at the same time is too hard. So let's just separate them.
Mary?
Yeah.
In kind of response to some of Craig, I mean, a lot of this has been evolving and it's been really frustrating. I mean, Emily's been so organized and she's worked so hard, but especially those of us that are only at a monthly meeting, and then there's this whole space and we're trying to have better communications just at the board level. It's been really frustrating. And I guess I have a question about, so the thing that we tabled, I was objecting to the adding of the cities and the townships. Well, what I'm more advocating, more concerned about is the fact that there's no feedback loop, that senior staff is coming up with policy and we don't get a chance to vet it. And I really think, you know, MAWDs are boots on the ground and they know how things work. When I see plans come out or policy, or, you know, like the roadmap or the non-point source, whatever policy, I see that they're listening to other groups, like environmental groups that they have great intentions, but they're not the boots on the ground. They don't know what it takes to get stuff done. So to me, it's been really frustrating. So I guess I want to hear more get more direction from you, but I participated in each one of those listening sessions, and the message came through loud and clear that they don't feel like they have a seat at the table. They're not heard. I mean, some of the comments were really disturbing because when I got on the Riley Perd board back in 2009, I mean, I'd heard for years how bad that board had been run because they'd given back their rules. They didn't have good relationships with the cities. And there was a Bowser staff person that helped me immensely to help ask the right questions, strip out my frustration, and help move us forward. So it was really disturbing for me to hear the feelings of so many people from around the state and within the metro. So, but I think we need to be vetting some of the policy before it's finalized. So I guess I wanted to hear from you on that.
We agree.
One really easy thing that change that could be made on that is, and like I said, Bowser does a lot of work having listening sessions, but then the policy gets written and then it's like boom, 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 and it just goes and it flies and it's approved. And I think maybe sometimes we have to start with writing the policy, right? When there are policies or edits, amendments, send that out, and then you'll get the feedback that you want. You know, until you see something, it's hard to just give feedback about what works and what doesn't. So that's one thing that I think could help.
So as soon as we get the packets, then send out. I mean, that's done in committee.
Well, right, but that policy that was shown to you the week or 2 weeks before the Bowser board meeting, that policy was written. That's the document that should have gone out to some locals and said, hey, are there any fatal flaws in this? And then it should have gone to the committee, and then it should have gone to the Bowser board. And we could have found those couple of concerns right away and just communicated that. If we see the red lines before they hit the board and before the Bowser committees.
The other thing I guess I wanted feedback on too, I see one of the things I heard was the more parties you've got at those one watershed, one plans, and it's not so much the metro as greater Minnesota, but everybody just wants a piece of it. And it sounded to me like they're losing track of a focus on the natural resource that we're trying to protect or restore. And everybody just wants their bite. And I heard that loud and clear too. So, I mean, we do our research, we do feasibility studies. I mean, we're ready to go. We've got the science. And so, I don't know, I think that's another message I'd want to hear from people about how we should be communicating that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother collection of issues that I'm trying to solve too.
Are there any?
I'm sorry that I created such a stumbling block here, but if I know that this information is going to be circulated or is available in circulation, if I know where to look for it, I would be pleased just to be party to the discussion, if you will. And
sure.
I appreciate Emily's efforts. I've supported Emily since I was part of the team that hired her. And I believe very strongly that Emily is doing a great job. and I just would like to be party to these plans. I don't know that I make a comment on any of them, but if I'm aware of them, I could be helpful. Or I can try.
Are there any other comments or questions on this? Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
And Emily, the next section is yours.
And this will not take us long. I didn't realize how long I was talking there. Usually I'm more of a short speaker. Legislative session update. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy this year. And the legislature is actually sticking to its deadlines. This is the first time that I've seen that happen since I started. They had their first deadline, their second deadline. They put their omnibus bills together, and they were hitting the floor last week. This week, on Thursday, actually, the environment omnibus bills are going to be on the floor of the House, and then it's going to be like conference committee, and it's not even May yet. So they've gone through all their committees and whatnot. There is not a lot of exciting stuff in there. Pretty much like Ray had predicted, if there wasn't agreement on some of this stuff last year, it didn't get in this year. They didn't allow a lot of topics to even be discussed in committee. And just don't kid yourself, no one has a lobbyist right now. It dawned on me the other day, the word lobby, true story, actually comes from the fact that the lobbyists hang out in the lobby back in the day to grab legislators. And that is where the word lobbyist come from. The guys that hang out in the lobby. And there's no lobby. There's no lobby to have those conversations. So things that took us 3 minutes last year, or well, 2 years ago, doesn't happen. You have to like write up your points, contact the legislative assistant, see if they'll get you a Zoom time, get there. There's no sidebars. There's nothing. And so nobody has a lobbyist. They have people that are trying their best to represent them. And they had the association I belong to for the Government Relations Council for lobbyists. They actually did like 101 lobbying on how do you lobby in a Zoom platform, and there were seasoned. Ray went to all those. I had meetings at exactly the same time every week, but he went to those because they didn't really know even how they were going to do business until about a month into session. So I'm preparing to hear the complaints about us not getting anything done. But I got to put it out there. Not a lot is getting done. Good news, nothing bad is happening to us. We are going to do a more extensive update and get that out to you about what exactly are in those omnibus bills, including the legacy financing bills, which are the Clean Water Fund. There's a couple of different ideas about how to fund the capacity for SWCDs. There's some storage bills, different ideas about how to get more storage on the landscape, which cool that the legislators figured out, oh, you know what would solve a lot of our problems? If we would put more storage on the land. Let's build a program for that. But we already have programs. We need the programs that exist to be funded. So we're kind of working through and trying to maybe steer them to funding the flood hazard mitigation more, or fund the plan more. So because it just is sometimes, and then they put like $3 million. Now it's $1 million, and I can just hear it already. Well, we gave you that $1 million for storage. Why isn't the water clean? So some education on that too. And so we've been working on that. We do need a Bowser board rep. Our representative was removed from the Heron Lake Watershed District mid-Bowser term. And so we have an opening. We were encouraging rural people to apply because we have Jill and Joe already represent the Metro. But so far, there's only 2 applicants, and we can't even submit a recommendation until we have 3 people that we can recommend to the governor. So if you think back to the MAWD conferences, you visited with someone you think especially in the rural area that you think would just do a bang up job on the Bowser board, please ask them. I think you always just have to ask people on leadership positions like this, unless you're a county commissioner. They will always volunteer. In the summer, we are going to try and do just a short little event. We obviously canceled the summer tour, but we're going to do a short event. We'll do a lunch and learn for a legislative update, and then just run through the resolutions process. And I did some training a few years ago about how to write a really good resolution. So we'll cover that also, and then kick off our resolution work for next year.
Mary?
Then the annual meeting there's some dates there. It will be that first that first week in December, like we always do. Not exactly sure of the exact dates, but hold those dates on your calendar. We are going to decide in June, hopefully, if we'll do that in person. We've got the hotel reserved, and we told them that we would hopefully know by June to make a decision. And hopefully we can meet in person. So look for that final decision on that this summer.
Any questions or comments?
Yes, I have one.
Okay, Jackie.
I can't find my hand raising tool, so I have to shout out like Craig.
That's fine.
This goes back to the legislative session update. You were talking about the omnibus bills being prepared and so forth already. There was one capacity funding bill that I saw before the SWCDs, and it was for all mortgage filings and all transfers, property transfer fees would go to the SWCDs, and this is at a county level now. So what I would like to see our lobbyists do is, if there is a watershed district in that county, that those fees go to the watershed district in that county instead of to the SWCDs. So outstate, it would be fractions of counties. In the metro, of course, we've got watersheds all over, and that's fine. But that's a way to shift some of that capacity money to the watershed districts.
That bill there's slightly different than you described. It is a fee that would be placed on those transactions. So it wouldn't be like the transfer, the entire transfer cost. It would be an additional, was it $15 or $25 on every transaction that department makes. And then that would go to the SWCD. But if there was a watershed district, then the county did not have to do that. But the counties are opposing, well, pretty much everybody is opposing that. But it was just another, was an example of trying to be creative about how they can not use the Clean Water Fund to do that. I don't see that one sticking around.
Well, in any effect, I don't think that we should prejudge what the outcome is. What I'm suggesting is that we get our lobbyists to present that language as a technical amendment to the omnibus bill and see if it flies. It's a way that we can have some of that money coming to the watershed districts. That's my point.
You have something to add there, John? John Waller, I heard you giggling.
Yes, Mary, that was me. I don't think that I would just leave that alone. That's all I'd do.
Okay, thank you.
Mary, this is Matt Moore.
Hi, Matt Moore. What can you do for us?
I would disagree with John, and he knows that. But if they're going to keep getting capacity money, we should get it too.
Okay.
Well, Mary, I'll rebuttal Mr. Moore. I think the way the bill is written, and the first I've heard about it is at this meeting tonight, it's an extra fee or tax, an amount of money attached to some transitions that take place on land. And the watershed district already has the capacity to raise your taxes and do your tax fees, whereas the soil water conservation district doesn't. And so that's the reason for, I think, that they said that watersheds would not be eligible to receive these extra tax monies. And as you know already, I'm sure South Washington County does, as Rice Creek, we do send some of our tax money that we collect through our abilities to support the soil and water conservation districts. And in addition, we often hire the soil and water conservation district to do tasks for the watershed district instead of hiring extra staff on the watershed. So I think that if you're going to ask the legislature to increase the taxing power of the watershed district, well, that's what you're asking. I don't think that's going to go anywhere because you already have that and ability to determine what the tax is. So I think that, like I said, you should just leave it be.
Just a rebuttal to that. The counties are the taxing authority for the SWCDs. And the SWCD's responsibility is to create a budget for every year that includes what they need from the counties. So I think that it's appropriate that we say that if there is a watershed district, those additional fees go to the watershed district for that particular area.
I think at this point, Emily's gotten the gist of both sides of this and should take it to Ray and take a look at where the bill is right now, what the prospects are, and what the best way to handle it is.
May I say one more thing, Mary, please?
Sure.
Matt Moore. John, I agree with you 100%. Okay?
Oh, wait a minute. Whoa.
I said it. I agree with you 100%. But the SWCDs need to go to the county and ask them to levy that tax. And they won't do it. And right now, that money is coming out of clean water funds, and it was supposed to go back to the general fund, and it has not. Is that correct, Emily?
That is correct.
So that money is going to SWCDs, and then we're giving them money on top of that out of our own tax money. So they're double dipping. That's what I will call it. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, John, but they can go to the county and ask them to tax, but the counties will not tax for the SWCDs. And we pay them a ton of money every year.
Mary, I agree, Matt. We do pay them a lot of money, and the counties won't support the SWCDs. And so legislation like this, it would allow the state to require a tax placed on land transactions, and that money be designated for the SWCDs, would relieve us from, hopefully, from having to subsidize the SWCDs, and also take the burden off, as you pointed out, well, the clean water funds being distributed largely to the SWCDs in the last couple of years. So
Emily,
that's why I would say
help
just
me out
use
here. They're already getting that deed tax, right?
At this point, we're just, we can go back and forth between you guys all night, and I think that
I'm sorry, Mary.
So we're going to just let Emily talk to Ray and get the lay of the land, and then give us an update with the next legislative update. Okay? All right. So now we're going to move on to Bowser. Kevin, do you want to give an update?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Couple of things to just to shed some light on the the One Watershed One Plan planning grant RFP. was approved, as Emily mentioned, at the March Bowser board meeting. The language regarding the municipalities came out of committee at a suggestion of a Bowser board member to provide some clarification on the municipal involvement. And municipalities have always been an optional participant in the One Watershed One Plan process. That hasn't changed. Really, the verbiage, probably the word or wording wasn't maybe the as sufficient as it could have been, but really the intent of the change was that if a municipality expresses interest in participating, that they should continue to be invited as an active participant. It wasn't giving entitlement, even though the word was used. That the intent of that wasn't the intention. And what came out of the March board meeting was that language was removed, and so the current RFP is the same as it has been from the get-go, that the municipalities continue to be an optional participant to be invited. They should be invited, but they're an optional participant, and it's up to the municipality as to whether or not they want to. One of the things that had come out of that was whether or not that would be brought back to the board. And Emily and Mary had submitted a letter expressing some concern about that. And one of the things that we're going to do is, rather than rushing it through for a decision, is to stick with the policy as was approved at March, and have some, over the course of the next year, in preparation for the next round of the planning grant RFP, when it's considered, basically around this time next year, in January, February of next year, to be prepared to have some conversations with MAWD, with AMC, with MASQUID, through the local government roundtable, just to have some conversations about the municipal involvement. We do have cities that are interested in participating. We've had some very successful city participation. The Cedar One Watershed One Plan, the city of Austin, has been a key driver behind that plan because of their interest. I think as we get into like the Shell Rock, the city of Albert Lea will probably want to be a pretty active participant. So it's not a matter of mandating or saying they need to be involved. It was a matter of, the intent of it was to say, if a city says they want to participate, they should, continue to be invited to participate through that process. So that'll be worked on over the course of the next several months or year. It's not an urgent matter right now. The concern was heard, and we didn't want to, rather than try to rush it through and try to figure out the right language, try to get feedback from all of you and the other roundtable partners, and get it to the April board meeting in time for this round of applicants to plan for that. It's gonna get pushed off. So that I just wanted to provide some information on that, and that'll be looked at over the course of the next year. Some other updates that I'll provide you with, Emily touched on. We've had, and Mark as well, the listening sessions, both specific to the Metro One watershed-based implementation funding. I've appreciated the insights and the comments. I know that our staff and John has as well. The listening sessions that we had with the administrators over the course of the last couple of weeks with each region were also very, very good, and good conversations. And it's good to do that. It was a way to, if you remember a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, John would do about a 2 or 3 week road show all over the state, and probably have 10 or 15 listening sessions all over the state, bringing together local government representatives and just having a conversation. And that's what we wanted to do with that. And we were doing the same thing on an area basis with with the SWCD managers or employees association as well, and those have been equally valuable. So I appreciate the comments, the insights, your expressing your concerns and thoughts to us so that we can continue, building a better water management, water resource approach for the state, and that's ultimately what we're striving for. The announcement that I sent out to administrators in March, we did fill the Central Region Manager position. So my previous position that was vacant room for about a year and a half. Marcy Westbrick, who is a Bowser employee, she was our clean water coordinator. So if you've had some clean water fund grants previously, your staff have maybe had an interaction with Marcy. She's started a couple weeks now, 3 weeks now in the Central Region Manager position, and she's we don't just dip their toe into the pool. We throw them deep end into the pool, and so she's figuring things out as we go. And you'll hear more from Marcy. She'll probably become a more regular attendee of the Metro MAWD meetings. And so you'll see her, and she'll be a great addition to the Bowser management, but also a good partner for you to be working with, in particular in the metro area. Mark had mentioned the Metro Watershed-Based Funding Implementation Fund, or Metro Watershed-Based Implementation Funding Survey. That's on another follow-up just to get additional insights so that we can continue to improve the process by which the Metro watershed-based funds are distributed out to local partners. And your comments are not being ignored or not being they're not negated. It's being worked into all of the other options that are being put out there, and the four or five that Emily showed. It's part of what we look at is a brainstorm, and what are all the possible options so that we can narrow down to the one that's going to be the most successful, and that will be going. We're continuing to work on that. We got your initial suggestion, or the follow-up suggestion that you had that Emily shared with you, and we're looking at that and seeing how we can incorporate that into the other ideas. And timing wise, it's similar to what it was 2 years ago, where we can't obviously bring anything to our committees or anything until after we know where the legislation comes to play and what we have for funding. And so it'll be late summer, early fall when that policy and the allocation amounts and everything are determined. And there's a number of other things that are just from the watershed-based funding aspect that we'll be looking at. Joe and Jill can attest, there was a long number of meetings and joint committee sessions of the Bowser committees trying to think about the funding formula. Groundwater was an aspect that was talked about 2 years ago, and we didn't feel like we had enough information or data to support that. So that has a potential, looking at the private land piece, the tribal piece, and so that work will be ongoing in terms of what that formula for the allocation of the funding amounts to each of the respective watersheds will be. Legislation, just as a quick FYI, Emily did a nice job summarizing in the work that the legislature has been doing today. The Senate passed the Omnibus Legacy Bill on a 66-0 vote in a matter of 25 minutes. I was expecting about an 8-hour meeting, and I got on about 5 minutes late, and they were already, kind of on their pat each other on the back thank yous and congratulations piece, and then they did a vote, and it was 66-0. A couple pieces there that included the Outdoor Heritage Fund. So for FY22, there's $128.4 million for outdoor heritage, and they largely took the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council recommendations with strong support. From the Clean Water Fund standpoint, it was $256.6 million for fiscal year 22-23. Again, largely taking the Clean Water Council's original recommendations, which is also in line with the governor's recommendations. They did not take any supplemental recommendations. Instead, they wanted to support the existing. They did include funding because there's a the Clean Water Council's recommendations was based on a $220 million projected budget forecast going back in, I think the May forecast or August forecast. And the council did not add any supplemental information. With the February forecast, there's an additional almost $30 million that was available with the February budget forecast, and that's reflective, the 256 is reflective of that. But the Clean Water Council did not add any supplemental recommendations. They wanted to stick with what they had. And so the Senate did include additional funding to complete the state's commitment for Minnesota CREP. They did fully fund, similar to the current biennium, the SWCD capacity, so 12 million each fiscal year to the SWCDs for the local capacity funding. The House does not have that same perspective as you talked about. I think they have half of that coming out of Clean Water Fund, then half out of that deed real estate transaction fee, which is, as Emily shared, is not strongly supported necessarily. I will say, having heard a couple of committees, that is sort of a Representative Rick Hansen's attempt to come up with another solution, because he doesn't feel like there has been many viable options, even though, and he's run down a list of options and proposals that he has considered over the years to have it out of Clean Water Fund, but this is just his latest attempt. And so, I'm going to guess it'll be interesting to see how the House looks at that and what happens in conference committee. Yeah, it was a surprisingly quick, non-controversial, not a lot of discussion on the Senate floor this afternoon for the omnibus legacy bill. So that's I guess a first step towards getting some work done. From the Environment and Natural Resources Finance Bill, that's the general fund. The Senate did have budget reductions to the agencies. I think the Pollution Control Agency, and Melissa maybe can attest to this, took probably the biggest reduction. I think Bowser and Department of Health and Ag is about a 5% reduction, and that will obviously go to conference committee as well. So, they're, like Emily said, they're keeping things moving. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes them in conference committee. I think for the Environment and Natural Resources, which includes the LCCMR money, that one's probably going to take much longer because they're still hung up on the clean cars bill in the House that the House has proposed, and the Senate isn't necessarily in favor of that. So I think that one will maybe take some added time. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions, but that's the update is sufficient for today.
Thank you, Kevin. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, this is maybe a process question, Kevin. The spending suggestions come out of the Clean Water Fund, or excuse me, the Clean Water Council, correct?
Yes, they do. Well, so the council puts together a recommendation that they provide to the legislature and the governor. Mm-hmm. The governor, his recommendations were largely in line with the Clean Water Council, and then each of the House and Senate, typically they use the council's recommendations as their baseline to start, and then can do with it what they will.
Sure, but who brings those proposals to the council? Is it the agency?
So the agencies, in following the governor's, working with the governor and the governor's recommendations, they develop proposals, they share them or present them to the Clean Water Council. So all of, part of last winter and into this past spring, all the way up through actually even I think July or August before they finalized it, all the agencies present their proposals. And then the council develops their recommendations based on all of the proposals. They did have a pretty, a much more robust input process with non-agency constituents and what as well. So they allowed other proposals to be heard by environmental groups, but the agencies developed their proposal and they present it to the council for council consideration.
Okay, so some of the initiatives that MAWD is working on behalf of watershed districts, in particular, getting some of these, extra excess capacity funds sent to the watershed districts, then we really should be starting with you, right? With Bowser, so that you can make those recommendations to the council, the Water Council, and that can go to the legislatures as part of their package. And if there's excess funds, there's expected to be a fast upturn to the economy once everyone's, got the vaccine and businesses can start opening again. And so if we end up with another surplus like we did this past year, then that excess money can be designated for watershed districts. And this is beyond any concerns people have about taxing authority. What it's all about is supporting our rural watershed districts who are having a difficult time with that $250,000 limit on their general fund. And the other thing is that we also want to accelerate. The whole point of the legacy fund is to accelerate clean water activities and projects and programs. And we all have projects that are stacked up in our plan because you cannot levy every year for the amount of projects and programs that you want to implement. So it's stretched out over time, and all of those things can work in favor of watershed districts moving quickly on implementing projects and programs. So my point is that we need to get Bowser to be the horse that we ride to get these concepts put into legislation.
It's largely dependent upon what the governor's initiative is. So for example, if you looked at Bowser's recommendation for clean water funds, that did not include SWCD capacity funds in Bowser's recommendations, because that was at the time the governor did not have any proposals for SWCD capacity at the time that our proposals were in place. And that, the council, obviously they didn't include it either. I think we can have some conversations about that in the appropriate place. It'd probably have to start with some bills introduced. I think as your previous conversation, we understand the challenge with the rural watershed districts with the 250 capacity piece. We do not have we're not lobbying for or take a position necessarily on the capacity piece. We're trying to find ways to solutions for that for SWCDs. I think we do have the same conversation with Emily and Ray and administrators in terms of how you do that. I know that it's unfortunate that you're in a rock and a hard spot, and that you have taxing authority, but the legislators and other local governments, mainly counties, don't want to see an increase in your taxing authority, and that gets into a challenging situation. And I think it might be to come in and I think we can have some conversations about what's the right way to do that. I don't have a direct answer for your response, other than I think we can have those conversations with Emily.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I guess I'm going to interrupt a little bit on this. Yes, Jackie, if we have ideas for how clean water funds should be spent, a great place to start would be Bowser and also our representative, which we don't have one. But when we do, we could start there to get those ideas across. We currently do not have policy, though, that says we are to lobby the legislature to get capacity funds, to seek capacity funds. Now we kind of would throw it out there, as, leverage when we say when we need a tax increase, we'll say, well, if you don't want to give us tax increase, maybe you should fund us. But we have not run that through the MAWD membership. So if that is a goal to seek state capacity funds, that needs to start with the local watershed district submitting a resolution so that can be discussed. I know there is definitely strong opposition that the Clean Water Fund, and we have said the Clean Water Fund needs to be focused on projects. But if we want to, that's a controversial topic. I will not direct Ray to do that. I do not feel comfortable on my own telling him to go after and get an amendment submitted to do something like that. It's a interesting idea. I just want to preserve our process because we do get criticized about that also, but sometimes we just do our own thing. And we do want to honor the resolution process.
Emily, this is Matt Moore. Mary, this is Matt Moore.
Hi.
Kevin, what is Bowser's position then on capacity funds?
Position is that SWCDs need to have stable, predictable funding that can support their operations, that would be allow them to carry out their work as they need to, because they don't have, basically they don't have any money other than what the counties give them, and now of course capacity funding, but it's to provide a stable, predictable funding source for SWCDs.
Stable, predictable funding, that's what's in the white paper.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one problem with the fee too. It wasn't stable and predictable.
Right.
Anything else?
That's part of the argument with clean water funds, is that it might be stable now, but until 2034. After that, it's anyone's guess. But the Senate's position has been that's as stable of funding and sources you're going to find. We have not, if you go back to when it was initially, developed, it was to be out of the general fund. And the legislature put it into the Clean Water Fund.
John?
I will say one strategy that if you hear people say that the SWCDs need capacity funding, and I'm starting to say this, and please you also say this, all local governments need adequate capacity to do their jobs. We both are struggling, and I'm trying to ride that wave a little bit with the SWCDs. We need capacity too, and the state is, standing in our way. Well, specifically more the rural ones, but are standing in the way of the SWCDs and the watershed districts by not allowing them to. We haven't been able to raise it for 20 years. So we all of our partners need adequate capacity to be able to do their jobs, the ability to fund their work.
John, did you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Kevin, what do you, at the end of your presentation, you used a phrase, a clean car bill. What does that mean?
Well, I don't know the insights of what they're looking at, but last year there was a proposal to basically have, if you've read the newspapers, they basically call it the California Clean Car Bill. So having the emission standards for cars increased to produce less emissions, and that got that essentially was able to hold hostage the LCSMR funding last year, and it's still kind of in that place. And so the governor has, with his climate initiative work, wants to see more strict car emission standards, and that's basically what it is, John. I don't know the details of it, but it's basically to reduce the amount of emissions further.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Then that's all I need to know. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Mary, it's Mike Welch.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. Emily, and I appreciate you recognizing that all local governmental entities and our partner organizations need stable supports. I just, as a watershed management organization, we're beholden to the same funding constraints that SWCDs are. We only get what the cities give us, for the most part, not getting into the intricacies of the Department of Revenue's position with regard to 251 funding and watershed management organizations. But that's not an external problem. It's an internal problem as well. Just a point of clarification now that us WMOs can be part of the party.
And we're glad you're here. Joe or Jill, who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Okay. Because in the interest of time, I'll just first say the plan that was presented tonight by Emily really makes sense to me. Over the last 6 months, I've tried to say to myself, what have I been missing? What's the disconnects that I've been not catching? So I've had informal discussions with John, Kevin, Emily, a lot of discussions with Mark. And basically, I've almost independently came to the same conclusions that Emily presented in the plan tonight. It just makes sense. I attended the 3 meetings, the 3 regional meetings. I have a better sense of the outstate issues. I had a very long discussion with Margaret Johnson about better understanding about soil and water versus the watershed districts on the outstate. The metro area is just different, and I think we have to accept that that's different. It's very possible that the current size of the watershed, like East Mississippi, is too big, and maybe we should be looking at that. Another thing is, does it make sense for Met Council to continue to have water, require the cities to have their own water plans? I think the cities, and I'm trying to do this quickly, I think the cities are concerned about budgets, because I used to work there and I'm very familiar with that, and that they're basically dealing with volume control, rate control. They're really not dealing with their sewers. They're really not dealing with water quality. We deal with water quality. And I think what we need to be asking ourselves is, how do we get this? This is in the metro area. Soil and water districts, have discussions with them, figure out what projects they have, try to get them into our plan through a plan amendment, which makes sense maybe every 2 or 4 years. Basically kind of go to the cities. I don't think they really want to be involved with water, at least not exactly for water quality. And we're basically, in the metro area, we're basically the drainage authority, and that's different than outstate. Outstate, the counties are the drainage authority. So I think we really need to recognize how we are different from outstate. And I'm just going a little background. I used to administer HUD grants, federal grants. I am used to checking the box. I respect the requirements or the directives of the state legislature for the One Watershed Plan. I believe that we need to respond to that with target measurable goals. I think what Emily presented tonight is a great step towards there, and I'm glad that Bowser is working. I think the communications is getting better or good. And I'll just go back and say, I really think what Emily wrote tonight, or what the MAWD committee submitted tonight, makes sense to me, as I have kind of walked my way through it, independent of knowing that this plan was being presented.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just say, Joe, you raised a good point. And I didn't mention it. We talked about it at the Region 3 listening session a little bit. One of the things that we've been working over the last a year now with Met Council in particular is looking at the watershed district WMO and municipal plans and planning process, and looking at ways for efficiencies, joining those, is there, a combination of those planning processes? Where do they align? Where there's some distinct differences? One of the surprising things, and I'll fully admit, I admitted it and made the statement at the listening session a week or so ago. When we surveyed the municipalities and the watershed districts, I was fully expecting what you alluded to, Joe, is that the municipalities are largely an infrastructure water plan, with the watershed districts, being the resource plan. And it was much more of a mixed bag than from both municipalities and watershed districts on that standpoint. There are some municipalities that are certainly very involved and very interested and have good water resource management plans, and they take that planning process seriously. And so as we're working through that process, is looking at where are there opportunities to streamline the plans. Is if it becomes sort of an infrastructure municipal plan with the resource plan being the watershed organizations is yet to be determined. But it kind of surprised me because I was fully anticipating a sort of the municipal plans aren't as valued perspective, and it was I was surprised that it was more of a mixed bag response on that. But we continue to work on that, and I think trying to find that was largely focused on the municipalities, and as we've worked further through the watershed-based funding piece, in particular with the SWCDs and county groundwater planning, we're starting to get we knew at some point we'd see those two separate processes intersect, and we're starting to have that intersect take place. And so we're looking at those approaches, and Metro Watershed District staff have been involved through that and provided really good input, and we'll continue to get that input and hope to look at an improved process for as we look forward, looking through the ongoing. It's certainly not an immediate or near-term resolution. It's that a long-term, long-view vision of how water planning and water management in the metro takes place in the long term.
Jill?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I hadn't seen some of this that Emily presented before. So, but we do, we do have CAC and we have TAC meetings. And so we do get input from our cities, hopefully. I mean, we have about 20 people at our TAC meeting, just trying to get all the cities represented in our counties and our agencies. And I mean, we try to be, when we're doing rules or something, if we're going to do a change, we always try to get feedback. So interesting to hear some of these perspectives. I already kind of gave my concerns before.
Okay. Anything else from Bowser or any questions? Melissa, do you want to talk, give us an update from the MPCA?
Certainly, thank you. So just real quickly, from the MS4 municipal side of things, just a reminder that the MS4 permit was reissued in November of last year, and the application deadline has passed. That was April 15th. So staff are in the process of reviewing all the submitted MS4 applications for completeness, and then the 30-day public notice of complete applications should begin in late May. On the water monitoring side, our monitoring is underway already for 2021. We're working on the Mississippi River Twin Cities watershed, including chloride monitoring on area lakes in the spring and the fall of this year. There's fish stocking to begin in late June, invertebrate sampling in August, and assessments would be coming then next year. And also just to note that we'd be completing the Lower St. Croix assessment now. So to be watching for folks in the St. Croix area, watch for some meeting invites in May for a professional judgment group meeting. Then on the RAPS process, just this is more outside greater Minnesota. There's 65 of 80 watersheds that have been approved for RAPS, and there are another 2 on public notice right now, and another handful that we're anticipating the public notices to be soon. So when we think of the overall RAPS process, the the pace of progress. The agency had kind of a slowdown in the pace of progress, and things are piling up, and we're getting past that, and the pace of progress should be meeting the overall goal for having RAPs across the state within the, oops, I just kind of forgot the date, but within the next 2 years, I think it is. So, I mean, then one other little piece of information that's, again, outside of the metro, but the Lake Pepin TMDL, which has been in progress for, I think, more than a decade, if not two. Folks that originally started on it have been long since retired. There were two contested cases, or there was a contested case hearing too. The agency has worked really closely with the Minnesota Stormwater Coalition and the Greater Minnesota Cities, I never get the acronym right, and really did some really constructive engagement and listening to get to a good outcome. So they withdrew their contested cases, and so that is moving forward. So that's and the good news with that too is that we've on the point source permits, we're already getting a lot of the reductions that we were hoping for, even in the draft TMDL. So those would be the updates from the PCA at the moment. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or get answers for you in the future.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Carrie, do you want to give an update from the Department of Health?
Melissa, are you happy not to be working for Kevin?
I think I'm having difficulties with my mic right now.
I was waiting for the response, Melissa. Very diplomatic.
Well, I was actually, kind of saying to Kevin, I missed some of the policy conversations. I really did enjoy working with the committees on some of the policy information, and I haven't forgotten all of the background on One Watershed, One Plan yet. But there's a whole new world. I'm still have lots of learning to do at the PCA. So, thanks, Matt.
That was a smart response there, Melissa. You must get that from your dad.
Carrie? Can't hear you at all. We're not getting anything. So there's got to be a setting on your computer that's not right. Have you turned your volume on just on your computer? Well, we'll catch you next time. How's that? Okay. Dan?
All right, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, so usually once a year I come and talk about some of our monitoring updates. My name is Dan Henley. I'm the assistant manager, and I work mostly with our monitoring and assessment crews. And, we talk a lot about camp with this group here. That's our lake monitoring program, which many of you are participants of. And so it's kind of an annual reminder that we're kicking that off. If you haven't enrolled in that, now's the time. I know Brian Johnson, our lake coordinator, has been in contact with many of your organizations already, getting lists and volunteers set up. So that's rolling out right now. I'm going to send some stuff to Mark as far as attachments, some PDFs. We have a brochure about that. If your organization maybe isn't part of our program and maybe wants to be, that's something that we're always looking for new participants. Similar to the PCA's update, as far as monitoring is kicking off here for the 2021, it's looking a little different than 2020. We had a couple months there where we put a lot of stuff on pause for the pandemic, stream monitoring, specifically our WAMP monitoring programs, which again, a lot of you are partners with. And so this year we're looking for a full year of that, which we're excited about. We just had our WAMP Cooperator Forum, kind of training and getting everybody getting ready for a full summer season of that. And so we're full steam ahead there. One other thing that we canceled last year was boat monitoring for social distancing, and so we're planning to resume that this year. That's our large rivers, Minnesota, Mississippi, St. Croix, as well as we do several lakes a year as part of our priority lakes monitoring program. So that's not a volunteer, that's our staff that actually go out on lakes. And so we have several of those lined up this year, some of it in coordination with the PCA. And the other thing that is kind of rolling out right now is we're doing some chloride partner memos. So the sites that we are having stream locations at, some of them are like 2/3 of our sites are with partnering organizations, and then 1/3 is in the Minnesota River Valley primarily that we don't have a direct partner, although we work closely with various watershed organizations in that basin. But we're rolling out these memos, which are actually pretty detailed and look at chloride trends specifically. We had come out with a comprehensive trend analysis like 5 years ago. We didn't have sufficient data to do it on chloride, and now we do. And so that's being rolled out, and we're hoping that good feedback so far. Bassett Creek was one of our kind of pilots on that, and Laura Jester was very helpful in kind of giving us feedback. And you know, excited. She's excited, so we're excited about having that incorporated into like newsletters and various outreach around chloride. So that's a big product that we're rolling out now this year. So stay tuned for that. And that's it for Met Council right now.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Dan? All right. Emily, do you want to give a Clean Water Council update?
I think what Kevin mentioned about the Clean Water Fund is a good of an update as can be. I have not gotten a call from the governor's office about the appointment yet, so we're still waiting on that.
Okay. Anyone from the local government water roundtable? Okay, well, you're on mute.
Hit it like 4 times. They meet next week.
Okay,
so we'll
sounds
try
good.
to send out an update in our newsletter.
Okay, John Vallata, you want to talk about the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council?
Certainly. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. I'll keep my comments relatively brief and try to relate these to how they impact watersheds specifically. So just a reminder that the purpose of the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council is to fund and to complete research that's needed to help us manage stormwater in our municipalities, our communities, and our watersheds. So there's 3 things that I thought I'd touch on tonight. First, our recently completed projects. The Minnesota Stormwater Research Council, which is partially funded by contributions from watersheds, cities, and the Clean Water Fund, began formally in 2017, and we've completed 12 of 19 research projects. So that's 2/3 of the research portfolio in a very short amount of time. I thought I'd mention 2 research projects that completed this month. First, a project led by May Davenport, which many of you probably know her name, but most interesting about her research is it focused on what inspires community leaders to take stormwater management actions. So this is looking at the social science aspect. We can invest in research on stormwater practices, but these things are done by people. And what motivates people to take actions. And so her work and her team was just published this month. I won't try to paraphrase that right now, but you might find that interesting. The second project that finished this month is a project that we funded with St. Cloud State University, looking at trace organics on organic compounds, including fecal coliform bacteria and stormwater runoff. We know that fecal bacteria is a huge impairment in many of our water bodies. So we're really trying to invest in research to tracking down where this bacteria is coming from. So those are 2 recent projects that completed this month. I thought I'd quickly mention 2 that are done in cooperation with watersheds, some of which are on the call tonight. That includes a research project that we have going on with biochar in filtration systems. So the MWMO is a partner with our research team on that one as an example. And just recently, John Gulliver and his very diverse team of 12 researchers just completed the research on stormwater pond phosphorus exports and imports. And of course, that was done in partnership with Riley Purgatory Watershed District and others, just to name a few. So my point of bringing those up is that this research is done collaboratively with watershed districts and organizations across the metro and across the state. The second thing is, okay, so if we have 12 of 19 research projects done, having them done and on the shelf does us no good. So we need to invest in technology transfer, putting these research results into the hands of watershed district people, professionals, municipalities that can use the research. And so we've been an investment in stormwater seminars every month to highlight these research projects and the results. We are actively having well over 150 participants in these seminars every month. Last year, we had 2,000 representatives in these seminars, so a great turnout there. But we want to take that to the next level, so hopefully by July 1st, the Water Resource Center will hire a full-time extension educator in urban stormwater, so to help our researchers translate these research results and these projects out to the greater community. So stay tuned for that. The last thing that I will touch on is the year ahead for the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. What does that look like? We will have our annual meeting July 15th. We will be starting promotion and notification about that soon. So I'll make sure that you guys know more about that. As Kevin alluded to, we as the Research Council are also dependent, if you will, on clean water funds. So we're waiting to see what happens with the legacy bill as well. But we anticipate that the Research Council will receive over $1 million of new research funding July 1st. And so with that will come a new suite of research projects that we will seek out this fall, and that new projects would begin in 2022. The last thing I will mention is on that funding, as I started with, the Research Council is funded in part by contributions and support from watersheds, cities, and private businesses. And I've spoken to you about that in a previous quarterly update. Last year, our goal for contributions from cities and watersheds was $150,000. We achieved that and exceeded that. Thanks to the support of many of you, we had $163,000 in support from cities and watersheds that we invested back into research projects. So therefore, our advisory board just last month set a little bit higher goal for 2021 that we hope that we can surpass $175,000 in contributions from cities, watersheds, and private businesses this year to match and leverage with those clean water funds that we get from the Minnesota legislature. So good things ahead. And if you have any questions, I certainly take those. Otherwise, we'll plan on further updates in the future.
Does anyone have any questions for John?
Mary, this is Matt Moore in South Washington. I have one comment, please.
Sure.
John, thank you. Thank you for running this thing. It was Cliff Eichinger's dream to have some research, and I know Donate kicks my butt in donation, but we're still in there, and John Loomis, our staff, participates, and I just want to thank you, John, doing a knockout job.
Well, thank you, but you don't donate. You support research. We never use the word donate, right? Watershed districts and organizations cannot donate.
That's better. I get it.
Thank you very much, John. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
John, I have not seen you for a long time, so it's good to see you.
Mark, do you want to give an update on MAWA?
Sure, I'll just do a short update on one particular effort. We talked a lot about working with Bowser and One Watershed, One Plan and Metro watershed-based implementation funding. And one of the committees that I think will be beneficial for all of us going forward is one I'm involved on, the state policy committee. And so we're certainly interested in policies on water management and water financing with Bowser, but we're also interested in keeping in touch with the DNR, the MPCA, Department of Ag, Department of Health statewide, and understanding what policies they may be working on and how that may affect our work. And so we're working on both a network of state agency folks that we can keep in touch with, and then on the watershed side, key people around the state who can, possibly look at and dig into some of these state policy changes so that we can be advised of these and provide feedback and make them better for all of us before they become enacted. That's all I have.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Mark? Anyone have any unfinished business or new business they want to bring up? Hearing none, our next gathering, which will also be virtual, will be Tuesday, July 20th, 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. And have a great spring, everyone. At this point,
adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second, and we're out of here. We'll see y'all later.
Good meeting. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.